Hello, I'm Peter Landau, managing editor of newsjunkie.net. I'm with Lance Knobel, who is the CEO and co-founder of Cityside, which is a nonprofit parent of Berkeleyside, the Oaklandside and Richmondside, as well as the East Bay food publication Nosh. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me this morning.
Happy to be.
Before you started Berkeleyside, much of your career was spent in business and international journalism. What did that work teach you about journalism as an institution, and what did you have to unlearn when you began covering one city block by block?
I don't know that there was any unlearning. I think anyone that does good work in journalism, you learn how reporting works, you learn how to get to the truth of something, you figure out what's a good story, what's not a good story. There are a whole bunch of things that I think to some extent are independent of the subject matter. What has proved very different about working locally is the immediacy of connection and response to people in the community. You run into people in the street. People stop you in the store. We write about things that affect our neighbors, people we see in the community. And that's a very different experience than writing about geopolitics or international business, some of the things that I did at various points in my career.
Maybe you could take me back to when you started this venture in 2009. What did you believe was missing from the city's news coverage, and what made you think that you could fill that gap?
Well, what was missing was any news coverage, pretty much. Berkeley, at one point, if you go back decades, had local newspapers. Those had vanished by 2009. There was a local paper, the Berkeley Daily Planet, that did some perfectly okay work, but was more about a political cause than doing real local reporting. They wrote about the things they were preoccupied with. They ignored the things they didn't care about. So no reporting on schools, on public safety, on a whole range of things. The three of us that started Berkeleyside thought there was an enormous gap in coverage of this city of 120,000 people that we lived in, that in many ways is a really interesting city. We thought we could do something. We had close to zero pretensions that we were starting anything of significance or that was going to be enduring. We thought it would be fun to do the odd thing, and it grew organically from there. We very quickly discovered, because of the response of the community, that there was a desperate need for reporting. People were incredibly supportive, even of the really modest things we did very early on. We started without any kind of plan or vision, but we quickly saw that there was a real demand for reporting and coverage of our city.
That community aspect is why I contacted you, because we're speaking to people that have a relationship with the community and are building trust and a sustainable model for local news. Cityside says its journalism is intended not only to inform people, but also to strengthen their connection to the community. So what does community building mean in journalistic practice rather than just a mission statement?
Our tagline is building community through local journalism. So it really is fundamental to what we do. I think this is not something we saw clearly in 2009 when we were starting, but over the years, I think we've developed a deep conviction that healthy communities need information, they need reporting, that journalism should be part of the civic infrastructure, the democratic infrastructure in a healthy society. So that can mean a lot of different things, all of which I think can help strengthen the sinews of a community, strengthen the interconnections. It's important for people to know what's going on. Information empowers people. It enables people to distinguish between fact and fiction. It enables people, if they're so motivated, to take action. Quite often, institutions, whether it's a city council or a planning commission or a local police department or a whole bunch of other things, are taking decisions or enacting policies that really affect the lives of people, sometimes in profound ways. Without the transparency as to what's happening, without the awareness, without the information about what those policies mean, what decisions are being taken, then people lack the power to do anything. That's part of what good local journalism provides.
I'm curious, two things. How does that principle affect the stories that you select for publication? What's the line between participating in a community and retaining the distance that you need to scrutinize it?
In terms of how our editors decide what stories they cover, we can't cover everything. There obviously are choices that need to be made. I think we've managed to hire and employ editors that get to know and learn their communities. In the case of Oaklandside, much of the staff is deeply embedded for long before they became employees of Cityside in Oakland. In Berkeley, Zach, who's the editor-in-chief, when we hired him, he was new to Berkeley, but rapidly became deeply immersed in it. You find out by talking to people, by using your editorial judgment, by assessing reaction. There are a whole host of things that go into why do we do this story and not that story. I'm sure there are times when there are stories we should be doing that we miss. No one can do everything. I think our track record over the years shows the judgments we use in deciding what to cover have proved to be pretty good. Remind me of the second part of your question.
Just the line between participating in a community and covering a community. How do you have that intimacy and the distance, that balance?
Well, we do try to maintain a certain distance, but I don't believe, and I think more broadly my colleagues don't believe in what the media journalism critic Jay Rosen calls news from nowhere. We're not trying to do something that is so detached, handed down from on high. And I think the principle we follow, the really wonderful Ashley Alvarado, who runs Texas Public Radio now in San Antonio, I think she coined this, and that is we should have a point of view, but we shouldn't have an agenda. We're not wholly detached. We care about the health and future of their city. We're not dispassionate observers, but we don't approach this with an agenda. We're not setting out to take a stand on, we think this kind of development should happen, that kind of development shouldn't happen. We care about the future and the health of Oakland or Berkeley or Richmond. That's why we do the work we do. We do it for those communities. So we have a point of view, and it's very clearly pro our cities. We want to see good things happen. We want to see the cities be healthy and to do well. And we want to see people in those cities lead fulfilling, healthy lives. We don't approach it with an agenda.
You have Berkeleyside, Oaklandside, Richmondside. They serve neighboring cities. They're different in size, history, demographics, political culture. So I'm curious what parts of the Cityside model can be replicated and what need to be rebuilt from the ground up in each place that you serve.
Yeah, every city is different. The three cities we're currently in are, in the case of Berkeley and Oakland, they are next door to one another. Richmond is a little bit further, but you can take BART and go from Oakland to Berkeley to Richmond in a pretty rapid time. These are geographically proximate places, but they're very different cities. They have different histories, different demographics. different politics. All the politics are on the spectrum from left to lefter. So it's not typical of a lot of the country. They're very different politics. We had a deep commitment to listening to the community, to understand things when we start. We'd been operating Berkeleyside for 10 years when we started thinking about starting Oaklandside. And it would have been conceivable for us to say, hey, we've been working next door to Oakland for 10 years. We kind of understand what's needed in Oakland. We're just going to do that. We didn't have that kind of arrogance. We did really extensive community listening, one-on-one conversations, convening groups, tabling at street fairs and festivals to build up a database of what sort of information did Oaklanders need? What were the issues they cared about? We did not presume to know. And we did exactly the same thing in Richmond when we started there. Oakland in 2020, Richmond in 2024. We start out with listening to understand the differences, and that listening is something we continue all the time. I think 3 years now, promoted one of our senior editors, Jacob Simas, who had been managing editor of the Oaklandside, to a new role, director of community journalism. One of the important things that Jacob does is make sure that we don't forget that we have to keep listening, keep engaging, working with people in the community, whether that's going into the high schools, meeting and listening to community groups, all sorts of different kinds of engagement and listening. It's not something you can do and then stop. It's something that has to continue.
I'm also curious about how Berkeleyside began as a for-profit publication, later became a nonprofit organization. So what did the for-profit years teach you about what local journalism can and cannot support through the market alone?
I think our 10 years as a for-profit, and there were never really very many profits, I think it taught us a lot about, as a for-profit, your potential revenue streams are smaller than your revenue streams as a nonprofit. It was advertising and what we called from the start membership. We never charged or had a paywall for our content. We never will, as a kind of matter of deep principle. Membership allows people to pay, it doesn't force them to pay. So that might be considered somewhat akin to subscription. When those are your revenue streams, it's really important to build up your audience and your connection to your audience so that people are reading your stuff and going to your site and getting your newsletters. And that discipline has helped us a lot as a nonprofit in maintaining really significant audiences and traffic for our content. That's something that I think there are some fantastic nonprofit newsrooms that, like us, care enormously about continuing to reach a really significant audience in their coverage areas. That's not always the case. And so I think having had that experience as a for-profit has helped us a lot as a nonprofit.
As a nonprofit, you get your revenue from membership, major donors, foundations, sponsorship, advertising. So what does a durable revenue mix look like, and are you achieving it?
Well, what I say to people is it's always uphill. We do not pretend, hey, we've solved this problem. Doing local news is really hard. But what we have been successful at is building diversified revenues. This year, our revenues will be about $6 million. The biggest portion of that will be from major donors, which we define as people who give us $1,000 or more. That will be about 35% of our revenues. The second biggest is our members. Those are the people that give us less than $1,000. We have about 8,500 of those across the three newsrooms. That will be about 30 to 33%. third area is foundations. That's somewhere in the 20s. Our expectation is over time, foundations will likely continue to decline. And I'm happy to discuss the reasons why we think that. And then fourth is advertising and sponsorship. I sometimes talk about a platonic ideal of we'd love to have a quarter, a quarter, a quarter, a quarter. We're not that far off of that. The smallest wedge, advertising and sponsorship, is somewhere not too far short of 20%, between 17% for that, 35% for major donors. That quarter is not that far out of sight. We're pretty happy with that mix of revenues, and I think that's healthy rather than being overly dependent on any one area.
You state your board, your funders, they have no role in editorial decisions, but is there ever any editorial tension going on in terms of your coverage?
Um, does any of our coverage affect our revenues?
Or more likely the other way around, does it affect your coverage?
I can say absolutely not. We maintain a really tight division between church and state. The newsrooms are the church, I being responsible for the revenues. I'm the state. I do not have any particular insight into what the newsrooms are doing until they've done it. We're really rigid about that. There are unquestionably wealthy people in some of the cities we cover who do not like us, and that's okay. I'd love it if they wrote large checks to us, even though we write about or cover things that they're unhappy with, but of course they don't. That's fine. So that's just comes with the territory. If we did not maintain that separation, if we went soft in our coverage to a corporation or to a powerful individual because there might be a good check at the end of it, maybe that would be a short-term boost for our business, but it would be a long-term cataclysm for the trust that we spend so much time building with our reporting, and that trust could be irretrievable.
Let me turn to journalism, if you can address how you measure whether one of your newsrooms is succeeding. Is it audience size or revenue, or I don't know, how do you look upon a newsroom as being successful?
I don't think there's any one kind of North Star metric that's all you need to pay attention to. We care enormously about our membership numbers because I think that's a very good proxy for somebody being a very engaged reader and consumer of our reporting, being so engaged that they say, I want to support this. Maybe it's with $5 a month, maybe it's with $100 a month. The average across the newsrooms is about $120 a year for most of those members. I think that's a good proxy for a very engaged consumer of our content. So we look at that a lot, but we care too about softer ways of measuring impact. If someone tells us that they were an infrequent or formerly voter or a non-voter, and they tell us, gosh, because of your coverage of local elections and why it matters, I got interested and I felt confident enough to go to the polls or to send in my ballot and to vote. That may not move a needle. We didn't change a law or send a public official to jail, but that kind of impact on the personal level is exactly why we exist. So we pay attention to anecdotal information like that. We'd love to change laws or expose corruption or all the things that one usually associates with capital J journalism. That's fine. We care about that. But there are more subtle things that are a measure of our impact, our connection, our import locally.
Broaden the lens a bit, like local journalism is being asked to solve several problems at once. There's disappearing advertising, weakening public trust, fragmented audiences, platform dependence, and rising costs. Which of those poses the greatest threat now, do you think?
Um, our audiences have stayed strong. I was speaking to one of my peers the other day who asked me, did we see a cliff in March in our audience? Because she and a number of others had seen that. We're not seeing that. There's talk in our world of the diminishing power of search to produce audiences. We're not seeing that either. So I stay very attuned to those issues, but so far we haven't seen a change. We haven't seen a lot of what some people call news avoidance. We have very engaged audiences. We do pretty well across age groups. I'm not sure how trustworthy things like Quantcast are when they give you age breakdowns of your audience, but some people trust Quantcast data. We do pretty well with people 20 to 35. A lot of people say those people don't read the news. We're not finding that's the case. I expect change. I'm confident, though, that if we continue to provide information that people need about the cities they live in and work in and that they care about, whether they're reading us, whether they're looking at an Instagram reel, whether they're following us on TikTok, whether they're listening to our podcasts, whatever way they want to get that information, if we're providing that, I think we will continue to have an important place in the community.
Many communities need local journalism. The Cityside model requires experienced leadership, substantial fundraising, and years of relationship building. So how transferable is that to places without the Bay Area's wealth or the philanthropic infrastructure?
It's a big issue. We're really fortunate. There are a lot of wealthy people here. I think we're good at this, but also the demographics we have, that's why major donors are the biggest part of our revenue. There are a lot of places in the country where that's not going to be possible, where foundations will be a much more important and necessary part of the equation. Even amongst our three cities, we don't spend a lot of time trying to forensically figure out, did this person give us money because they care about Berkeleyside or did they care about Cityside? Unless somebody states why they're giving, we don't investigate that. But I think we've got a good idea that Oakland compared to Berkeley, compared to Richmond, there is a different mix of potential revenue in each of those. Part of the idea behind being a network of sites, of having Cityside as the umbrella for this, is that this portfolio of newsrooms strengthens each other. In the Bay Area context, Richmond is not as prosperous a city as Berkeley. And we still want to serve Richmond, and we can serve Richmond because of the strength we have as a network. I wrote a piece for Neiman Lab at the end of last year about, I think that part of the way over time will solve problems like, how do you cover more rural areas or cities that couldn't afford to sustain a newsroom? I think it will happen through what some people call multi-local models, what we call immodestly a city-side model, of having the different parts of the network act as cross-subsidization, which would enable going into a less viable area as a standalone newsroom.
You've been kind with your time. I just have one more question and then I'm going to
Sure.
let you go. So you have 15 years of building local news organizations. What do you now believe a community newsroom must have before it can realistically have a chance of survival?
Yeah, 17 years. So
Oh,
don't sell us short. Um, uh, well, the first and most fundamental thing is you have to do good work. Without the journalism, without the reporting, you don't have anything. So that's the most fundamental table stakes. But the complicated thing is you also need to have a business. Doing the good work is necessary, but it's far, far, far from sufficient. My background was as a journalist, but a number of years ago, I decided I'm going to take charge of the business so that my colleagues could continue to concentrate on the journalism. You need to have some kind of division of labor like that, somebody who really is determined and passionate about building the revenue side, whether that's as a nonprofit with a mix of major donors, foundations, members, advertising and sponsorship, whether it's on a for-profit model with a subscription price and maybe membership too, and maybe advertising and that kind of mix. Somebody needs to drive that. And what has fostered this growing world of independent local news is that there are people who have managed to juggle these things and more people get interested in it. But there is definitely a shortage of people who care enormously about local journalism and also want to drive the business side. So you need both of those.
Yeah, very well put. Lance, thank you for your time. I really appreciate the work that you're doing up there in Northern California.
Yeah, happy to help. And thanks so much for the time.
Oh, you're welcome. Have a good day.
You too. Bye bye.